Previously on America's origin story, 13 colonies fought for independence. Now that young nation faces its first real test. This is Building a Nation, the Early Republic.
In 1787, a new document promised something no government had fully tried before, a system built on the consent of the people themselves. After a summer of fierce debate, delegates in Philadelphia had drafted a new constitution, designed to create a stronger, more balanced government.
The Constitution divided power into three branches: legislative to make laws, executive to enforce them, and judicial to interpret them, each able to check the others.
This system of checks and balances ensured no single branch could grow too powerful, a safeguard against tyranny.
Power was also split between the federal government and the states, a balance meant to keep government close to the people while still unifying the nation.
Before it could take effect, the Constitution needed approval from the states. This sparked a fierce debate between Federalists, who supported it, who feared it lacked protections for individual rights.
Critics argued the Constitution said too little about protecting individual freedoms, and many states agreed to ratify only if a Bill of Rights would follow. James Madison took up the task, drafting a series of amendments to guarantee the freedoms many feared the Constitution had left out. In 1789, Congress proposed 12 amendments. 10 were ratified in 1791, becoming the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights protected freedoms like speech, press, religion, and assembly, along with the right to a fair trial and protection from unreasonable searches.
Together, the Constitution and Bill of Rights created a government strong enough to function, but limited enough to protect individual liberty. Amendable, adaptable, and still in use today, the Constitution became the longest surviving written national constitution in the world.
More than two centuries later, its framework still shapes how the United States is governed.
With the Constitution ratified and the Bill of Rights secured, the new government now needed someone to lead it, a role no one had ever filled before. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected the first president of the United States. He took the oath of office knowing every decision he made would set a precedent for every president after him.
He assembled the first cabinet, including Alexander Hamilton as Treasury Secretary and Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, two brilliant minds who would soon become rivals. Hamilton pushed for a strong central government, a national bank, federal debt assumption, and policies favoring industry and commerce.
Jefferson feared centralized power, favoring states' rights, and an agricultural society rooted in individual liberty.
Their disagreement wasn't personal, it was philosophical, and it planted the seeds of America's first political parties.
Hamilton's supporters became known as Federalists, favoring a strong national government and closer ties with Britain.
Jefferson's supporters became known as Democratic Republicans, favoring states' rights and closer ties with revolutionary France.
In 1794, Washington personally led troops to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, proving the new federal government could enforce its own laws. Warning about the dangers of political divisions and entangled in foreign conflicts, a message many believed came too late. By voluntarily leaving office after 2 terms, Washington set a precedent for peaceful transitions of power that would define American democracy. Washington's presidency didn't just launch a government, it launched a political rivalry that would soon be tested on the world stage, as a new conflict began brewing with Britain. That tension with Britain didn't fade, it grew. By 1812, decades of disputes at sea had pushed the young United States to the brink of war. Britain and France both restricted American trade as part of their own war, crippling American merchants and stoking public anger. Britain and France both restricted American trade as part of their own war, crippling American merchants and stoking public anger.
A new generation of congressmen, known as the War Hawks, argued that only war could defend American honor and open the door to expansion into British Canada.
On the frontier, the Shawnee leader Tecumseh built a confederacy of native nations resisting American expansion, an alliance that would soon side with Britain. In June 1812, President James Madison signed a declaration of war against Britain, America's first war since independence. Early attempts to invade Canada failed badly. The American military was small, underfunded, and unprepared for a major war.
But at sea, American ships like the USS Constitution won stunning victories, boosting morale even as the land war struggled.
In 1814, British forces marched into Washington, D.C., and set fire to the White House and Capitol, a devastating blow to national pride.
By late 1814, both sides were exhausted. The Treaty of Ghent ended the war, restoring things largely to how they were before it began. Ironically, the war's most famous battle happened after the treaty was signed. Andrew Jackson's victory at New Orleans occurred because news hadn't yet crossed the Atlantic.
With peace secured, the nation now turned its eyes toward vast new lands and a growing vision of manifest destiny.
With its place in the world secured, America turned its eyes westward, toward land that seemed endless, and a future that felt destined. By the 1840s, many Americans believed it was their destiny to expand across the entire continent, a belief known as manifest destiny. It started decades earlier, when the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States overnight, opening the door to everything that followed. Thousands of settlers packed up their lives and followed trails like the Oregon and Santa Fe, braving mountains, rivers, and unknown dangers in search of new land. This expansion came devastating cost. Native nations were pushed from their ancestral homelands, often through broken treaties and forced removal. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas, a move that pleased American settlers but angered Mexico, setting the stage for conflict. Border disputes escalated into war in 1846. American forces pushed deep into Mexican territory, ultimately winning a decisive victory. The 1848 treaty ended the war, with Mexico ceding vast territories, including California, Arizona, and New Mexico, to the United States.
Just as the ink dried, gold was discovered in California, triggering a massive rush of settlers hoping to strike it rich.
Towns sprang up almost overnight, and California's population exploded, fast-tracking its path to statehood. With settlers now scattered from coast to coast, momentum began building for an even bigger idea: a railroad to connect the entire nation. In just a few decades, the United States had transformed from a narrow strip along the Atlantic into a continental nation stretching to the Pacific. But this rapid growth raised a question the nation could no longer avoid. Would these new territories allow slavery or not?
That displacement we mentioned wasn't accidental. It was the result of a deliberate federal policy, one that would force tens of thousands of native people from their homes.
By the early the American Southeast, some with their own written constitutions and legal systems. As cotton farming expanded, state governments and settlers increasingly pressured Washington to open native lands for American use. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, authorizing the federal government to relocate native nations west of the Mississippi River. The Supreme Court ruled in Worcester v. Georgia that the Cherokee had the right to remain on their land, but the ruling was ignored, and removal proceeded regardless. Throughout the 1830s, federal troops forced Cherokee families and other native nations to leave their homes, often with little warning and few possessions. This forced march became known as the Trail of Tears, a grueling 1,000-mile journey west made in harsh conditions with inadequate food, shelter, and medical care. Historians estimate thousands of Cherokee people died during the journey, from exposure, illness, and exhaustion. The Cherokee were far from alone. The Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations endured similar forced removals during this same period.
In Florida, the Seminole resisted removal for years. Second Seminole War, one of the costliest conflicts the U.S. Army fought against a native nation.
Despite immense loss, these nations rebuilt their communities, governments, and cultures in what is now Oklahoma, a testament to their resilience. As the nation continued to expand westward, a different kind of division was growing, one between North and South that would soon threaten to tear the country apart.
That growing divide between North and South wasn't just political, it was economic. And it traces back to a massive transformation now known as the market revolution.
In the early 1800s, America began shifting from small farms and local trade toward large-scale manufacturing, national markets, and mechanized production.
Textile mills, like those in Lowell, Massachusetts, employed thousands of young women operating powered looms, one of the first large-scale factory workforces in America.
New infrastructure made this boom possible. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic, slashing shipping costs and opening new markets.
Railroads soon followed, moving goods and people faster than ever before, and stitching together a growing national economy. Instead of working their own land, more Americans now worked for wages, a fundamental shift in how people earned a living. Waves of immigrants, especially from Ireland and Germany, arrived seeking work, providing the labor force that powered this new industrial economy. The Northeast rapidly industrialized, building cities, factories, and an economy centered on manufacturing and wage labor. The South, meanwhile, doubled down on agriculture, particularly cotton, grown on plantations that relied heavily on enslaved labor. The invention of the cotton gin decades earlier had made cotton wildly profitable, deepening the South's reliance on slavery even as the North moved away from it. By the 1840s, the North and South had developed into two increasingly different economies, one industrial and urban, the other agricultural and built on slavery.
These economic differences increasingly shaped political battles over tariffs, trade, and above all, the future of slavery in new territories.
This growing divide between two economies and two ways of life was setting the stage for the greatest crisis the young nation had ever faced.
That growing divide wasn't only about factories and cotton fields. Alongside it, a moral movement was rising, one determined to end slavery altogether. It had existed since the colonial era, often rooted in religious groups like the Quakers, Islachers. But by the 1830s, it grew into an organized national movement. In 1831, William Lloyd Garrison launched The Liberator, a newspaper demanding the immediate end of slavery, a bold and uncompromising voice for abolition. Douglass, who had escaped slavery himself, became one of the movement's most powerful voices, writing and speaking about his experiences to audiences across the North.
A network of safe houses and secret routes, known as the Underground Railroad, helped thousands of enslaved people escape to freedom, guided by figures like Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman personally guided dozens of people to freedom, risking her own life again and again. Women played a central role in the abolitionist movement, organizing meetings, writing pamphlets, and building the same organizing skills they would soon turn toward their own rights. Many women realized that if they could organize to fight for others' freedom, they could organize to fight for their own rights too.
At the time, women couldn't vote, often couldn't own property once married, and had little legal standing of their own. In 1848, activists including Elizabeth Cady Stanton organized the Seneca Falls Convention. This was the first major women's rights convention in the United States. There, delegates signed the Declaration of Sentiments, boldly declaring that all men and women are created equal and demanding the right to vote.
Abolition and women's rights grew side by side, sharing leaders, strategies, and a shared belief that America's promise of equality still had a long way to go.
As these movements grew louder, the divide between North and South grew even harder to bridge, pushing the country ever closer to the brink of war.
The early republic had built a nation and grown it coast to coast. Next, the Civil War era, 1870s.